I was 52 years old when my husband told me it was time to think about my comfort. That's the word he used. Comfort. We were sitting at our oak kitchen table in the house we'd lived in for 26 years. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, cutting thin golden lines across the floor I used to mop on my hands and knees every Saturday. My right hand trembled as I tried to lift my coffee mug. The tremor had become my quiet companion over the past year. Small at first, like a nervous tick, then bolder. By spring, I couldn't button my blouse without sitting down to steady myself. The neurologist had called it early-onset multiple sclerosis. David called it a reality we have to face. He folded his hands on the table like he was closing a business deal. The doctor said it's progressive, Claire. You could fall when I'm at work. What if something happens? I can't watch you every second. I nodded because I was tired. Tired of doctors' offices that smelled like antiseptic and lemon wipes. Tired of pamphlets with smiling gray-haired couples hiking in the mountains like MS was a hobby. Tired of pretending I wasn't scared. I found a place, he said gently, just to look at. It's not forever. That's how it began. The facility was 20 minutes from our house. The lobby smelled like overripe bananas and disinfectant. A television mounted too high on the wall played a game show at full volume while 3 residents slept in recliners beneath it. A young woman in pastel scrubs called everyone sweetie. It's lovely, David whispered as if we were touring a bed and breakfast. I tried to imagine waking up there. Tried to picture my coffee mug in someone else's cabinet. My bed replaced by a narrow twin with rails. It's temporary, he said again. I believed him. I signed papers because my hands were shaking and he said he would handle the rest. I told myself this was what strong marriages looked like, hard decisions made together. Thank you in advance. And you, what would you do in this person's place? I would love to hear your opinion, so please share it with me in the comments. I'm always curious about what you all think, and also write me where you heard this story. For more life stories like this, like the video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting for you. With heartfelt greetings. Until next time. But something shifted after I moved in. David stopped visiting every day. First it was understandable. Long week, he'd say. Big project at work. Then visits became Sundays only. Then every other Sunday. He stopped bringing my favorite peach yogurt. He stopped asking about physical therapy. My daughter Marissa started sounding distant on the phone. Dad says you're adjusting well, she told me once. He thinks it's safer this way. Safer. I stared at the pale green walls of my room, at the framed photograph of our house that I'd insisted on bringing. White siding, blue shutters, the hydrangea bushes I planted with my grandmother's clippings. My grandmother. That house had been hers. She raised me there after my mother died. When she passed, she left it to me in her will. Not to me and my husband. Not jointly. Just me. David knew that. We talked about it when we refinanced 10 years ago. The deed remained solely in my name because my grandmother had been specific. Keep it yours, she told me once, squeezing my hand in her hospital bed. A woman should always have something that's hers. I hadn't thought about that in years. Until the afternoon I called home and a woman answered. Hello. I froze. I'm sorry. I think I dialed wrong. No, this is 214 Maple, she replied. Who's this? Maple. My street. This is Claire, I said slowly. David's wife. Silence. Then, oh. Just that. Oh. I don't remember hanging up. I only remember the hum in my ears, like standing too close to highway traffic. David didn't answer my calls that evening. The next day, I asked the nurse to wheel me outside so I could think. The air smelled like freshly cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower droned steadily, ordinary life continuing without me. I called an old friend instead. Linda used to work as a paralegal. We hadn't spoken in months. Claire, she said, surprised. Are you okay? I wasn't sure how to answer that. I told her about the nursing home, about the woman answering my phone, about the slow fade of my husband's concern. She went quiet in a different way than David did. Focused. Claire, she said carefully. Whose name is on the deed? Mine. Only yours. Yes. And did you sign any transfer documents recently? Power of attorney? Quitclaim deed. No. Just medical papers. She exhaled. Then legally, that house is still yours. The word legally felt sharp and solid in my mouth. Linda drove out to see me that weekend. She brought copies of property records printed from the county website. My name sat there in black and white. Sole owner. I stared at it for a long time. David had moved me out of my own house. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, something steadier rose up inside me. Not anger, something colder. Clarity. Linda helped me contact an attorney. A patient woman with silver hair and reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She visited me in the nursing home conference room, between bingo hour and dinner. Mrs. Harper, she said, scanning the documents, you are the sole legal owner of the property. If your husband has allowed someone else to reside there without your consent, that's unauthorized occupancy. Unauthorized occupancy. It sounded so clinical compared to the image in my head. Another woman standing in my kitchen, opening my cabinets. What are my options? I asked. She looked at me directly. You can go home. The simplicity of it stole my breath. We filed paperwork within the week. David showed up 2 days later, furious and pale. He stood at the foot of my bed like a man who'd walked into the wrong meeting. You went behind my back, he demanded. I noticed how tired he looked. How thin his patience had always been, even before my diagnosis. You moved me out of my own house, I said quietly. It was for your safety. And who is she? His jaw tightened. That's not the point. It is to me. He didn't deny it. That was the moment something in me settled permanently. Not shattered. Settled. I'm coming home, I told him. You can't manage alone. I won't be alone. He scoffed. Marissa agrees with me. Does she? I asked. I'd already spoken to my daughter the night before. I told her about the deed. About the woman. About how scared I'd been and how quiet I'd stayed. She cried. I thought Dad was protecting you, she whispered. He said you were confused. That the disease was progressing faster than it is. Confused. I had felt weak in my body, but not in my mind. 2 weeks later, I rolled up the front walkway in a borrowed wheelchair. My attorney beside me and a locksmith behind us. The hydrangeas were still blooming. David opened the door before we knocked. The other woman stood behind him, barefoot, wearing one of my old cardigans. The locksmith cleared his throat politely. I believe this property belongs to Mrs. Harper, my attorney said evenly. No one shouted. No one made a scene. They packed quietly. I watched from the porch as boxes were carried out. The same porch where I once rocked Marissa to sleep during thunderstorms. The same porch where my grandmother shelled peas into a tin bowl every summer. When the door closed behind them for the last time, the house felt hollow but not broken. Marissa moved in with me temporarily. Not because I needed a caretaker, but because she wanted to understand. She set up her laptop at the kitchen table and worked remotely. At night we cooked simple meals together. I moved slowly, but I moved. Physical therapy continued at an outpatient clinic instead of inside pastel walls. David filed for divorce 3 months later. I didn't fight him on it. He asked for a portion of the house. The judge denied it. When the papers were finalized, I sat alone in the living room, sunlight warming the hardwood floors. My body still betrayed me some mornings. My hands still trembled. But the house was quiet in a way that felt honest. Illness had made me vulnerable. It had not made me invisible. Sometimes neighbors ask if I'm angry. I'm not. What I feel is something steadier than anger. Ownership. Of my home. Of my choices. Of the rest of whatever time my body allows me. My grandmother once told me a woman should always have something that's hers. She was right. And at 52, sitting in the house she left me, I finally understood what she meant. The divorce was finalized in late October. The leaves had just started turning, and from my living room window the maple tree out front looked like it had caught fire in slow motion. Orange at the tips, stubborn green clinging underneath. I watched the papers arrive by certified mail. Watched the postal worker tuck the envelope into my box like it was any ordinary delivery. Utility bill. Grocery flyer. End of a 28-year marriage. Marissa was at work in the next room when I opened it. There wasn't much to read. Legal language has a way of draining the emotion out of everything. Dissolution. Equitable distribution. No spousal support awarded. No spousal support. The judge had looked at David and said almost kindly, "You chose to vacate a home not legally yours." I don't think David ever expected consequences. I think he expected me to be grateful. Grateful he had handled my illness. Grateful he had made decisions. Grateful I didn't fall and embarrass him with my weakness. The first night after the papers were signed, I didn't cry. I walked slowly from room to room. My legs felt heavy, and I used the cane the physical therapist insisted I keep by the door. The house creaked in familiar places. The hallway still smelled faintly of lemon oil. The bedroom felt bigger without his dresser against the far wall. I opened the closet and ran my fingers along the empty half where his suits used to hang. I realized I didn't miss him. I missed who I had been when I believed we were solid. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. Winter came early that year. The cold stiffened my joints, and some mornings I woke up with pins and needles running down my left side. A mess is unpredictable like that. One week I could stand at the stove and cook a full meal. The next I needed to sit after buttering toast. But there's a difference between struggling and surrendering. At the nursing home, I had felt like I was waiting for something to end. At home, even on the hard days, I felt like I was living. Marissa stayed longer than she originally planned. At first she hovered, watching me carry plates, walking a step behind me like I might tip over at any second. Guilt clung to her like static. "I should have come sooner," she said one evening while folding laundry on the couch. I believed him. "You believed your father," I replied. "That's not a crime. He said you were confused. That the disease was affecting your memory." I let that sit between us. I was scared, I admitted. Scared enough that I let him decide things for me. "That's on me." She shook her head. "No. He made you smaller." That sentence stayed with me. He made you smaller. I thought back over the years. The way he'd correct me mid-sentence at dinner parties. The way he handled the finances, because he was better at numbers. The way my opinions slowly became suggestions then silence. Illness hadn't started the shrinking. It had only made it easier. In January, I received a letter from the woman who had answered my phone. Her name was Elise. She didn't apologize exactly. She wrote that David had told her we were emotionally separated for years. That I had chosen assisted living because I preferred it. That he was lonely. Lonely. She said she hadn't known the house was mine. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of the hall table. I didn't respond. Some truths don't need your voice to validate them. By spring, I had installed handrails in the bathroom and a ramp over the front steps. Not because I was giving in, but because I was planning to stay. My neurologist adjusted my medication. Physical therapy strengthened muscles I didn't realize I still had. I learned the rhythm of my body the way you learn the tide patterns of a beach, when to push, when to rest. One Saturday morning I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching neighbors walk their dogs. Mrs. Alvarez from 2 doors down stopped at the gate. "We missed you," she said simply. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that. Community feels different when you almost lose it. Word traveled as it always does. Some people looked at me with pity. Others with curiosity. A few with quiet admiration. Divorce at 52, illness, public unraveling. It makes you visible in ways you never intended. But visibility isn't the same as shame. I started volunteering remotely for a local support group for women with chronic illness. Just phone calls at first. Then small online meetings. Women my age. Younger. Older. Some newly diagnosed. Some decades in. One evening, a woman named Tara broke down mid-sentence. "My husband says I'm not the woman he married," she whispered. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of that sentence. "I'm not the woman I was either," I told her gently. "But that doesn't mean I'm less." Silence on the line. Then soft crying. Helping her felt like stitching something inside myself back together. The first time David came back to the house after the divorce, it was to collect a box he'd forgotten in the attic. I considered telling him I'd mail it. Instead, I told him to come by at noon. He stood on the porch looking older than I remembered. Not physically, just diminished. Like the air had been let out of him. "Claire," he said awkwardly. "David." We stood there in the space where so many arguments had once lived. I didn't think it would go this far, he admitted. That's the problem, I replied. You didn't think. He looked past me into the house. You seem settled. I am. He nodded slowly. I thought I was protecting myself. There it was. Not protecting me. Protecting himself. From inconvenience. From discomfort. From watching illness up close. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, I said, and I meant it. He carried the box to his car without another word. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart steady. No anger. No triumph. Just finality. On my 53rd birthday, Marissa baked a lopsided chocolate cake and insisted on lighting too many candles. Make a wish, she said. I looked around the room. At the worn couch. At the dent in the wall from when she'd thrown a softball inside at 14. At the framed photo of my grandmother by the bookshelf. I didn't need a wish. I had already reclaimed what mattered. So I blew out the candles and said, I'm exactly where I need to be. MS still walks beside me. Some days it leads. Some days I do. But I am not parked in a hallway waiting for someone else to decide my comfort. I am in my home. The house my grandmother trusted me with. The house my husband thought he could quietly replace me in. The house that held my marriage, and then held me when that marriage dissolved. A woman should always have something that's hers. At 52 I almost forgot that. 53 I live it. By the time summer came around again, the house had a different rhythm. It wasn't louder. It wasn't fuller. It was steadier. I had learned to move through it without rushing. In the mornings I shuffled to the kitchen before the sun got too high, when the air still felt cool and forgiving. I'd brace one hand against the counter while the coffee brewed, listening to that soft, patient dripping sound. My legs were stiff most days now, and sometimes my left foot dragged just slightly if I didn't concentrate. But I was there. That mattered more than I had words for. Marissa eventually moved back to her apartment across town. Not because she didn't care, but because she had stopped hovering. We had found a new balance between independence and support. She came by on Sundays with groceries and gossip about her coworkers. Sometimes we cooked. Sometimes we just sat. One evening, she lingered longer than usual. Dad called me, she said carefully. I kept my eyes on the green beans I was snapping into a bowl. Oh. He and Elise broke up. I waited for the twist in my stomach that I expected. It didn't come. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I answered truthfully. She studied me like she was trying to detect cracks. He asked about you, she added. Said he hopes you're managing. Managing. Used to be that word would have stung. It would have felt like a quiet insult, as if my entire existence had been reduced to coping. Now it felt small. I'm not managing, I said gently. I'm living. Marissa smiled then, slow and proud. The MS progressed as the neurologist said it might. There were new symptoms. A fog that drifted in on humid days. A heaviness in my arms that made folding laundry feel like lifting wet sand. I stopped driving after one afternoon when my reaction time scared me. Handing over the car keys was harder than signing divorce papers. Illness takes pieces in installments. It never robs you all at once. It tests what you're willing to grieve, and what you're willing to adapt around. So I adapted. Groceries were delivered. The lawn was handled by a neighborhood teenager saving for college. I converted the dining room into a small bedroom, so I wouldn't have to climb stairs when my legs refused. And slowly, without ceremony, I began hosting a weekly circle in that same room. It started with 3 women from the chronic illness support group. We met online for months before someone joked. We all live within 40 minutes of each other. The first time they came over, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been since high school. Would they see the tremor? Would they notice how long it took me to answer the door? They noticed. And they didn't look away. We sat in mismatched chairs, cups of tea balanced carefully on coasters, and talked about things no one had let us say out loud before. About husbands who left. About husbands who stayed but grew distant. About children who didn't know how to look at a mother who couldn't open jars anymore. About fear. There is something powerful about being witnessed without being pitted. One afternoon after everyone had gone home, I wheeled myself to the hallway mirror and really looked. The lines around my mouth were deeper. My shoulders curved forward more than they used to. My hands trembled even at rest now. But my eyes were clear. Clearer than they had been in years. In late September, David knocked on my door again. Not for a box this time. He looked thinner. The confidence he used to wear like a tailored jacket had slipped somewhere along the way. "I won't stay long," he said. I considered telling him to leave. Instead, I stepped aside. He walked through the living room slowly, as if it were a museum exhibit of his former life. His gaze lingered on the mantel where our wedding photo used to sit. I'd replaced it with one of my grandmother and me in the garden. "You changed it," he murmured. I did. We sat across from each other at the same oak kitchen table where he had once told me it was time to think about my comfort. "I handled it badly," he said finally. "Yes," I replied. He flinched at the lack of cushioning in my answer. "I was scared," he continued. "Watching you decline. I didn't know how to be around it." "So you removed it," I said softly. His eyes filled unexpectedly. "I didn't think you'd fight back." There it was again. "You didn't think." "I didn't either," I admitted. Silence settled between us. Not hostile. Just honest. "I don't want to be your caretaker," he said after a while. "But I don't want to be your enemy either." "I'm not asking you to be anything," I said. "That's the difference now." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. When he left, I didn't feel reopened. I felt confirmed. The marriage had ended long before the nursing home. The nursing home had just been the final expression of something that had been eroding for years. That winter, my neurologist mentioned the possibility of needing more consistent assistance in the future. "You should plan," she said kindly. "On your terms." On your terms. I drove home while Marissa drove, thinking about that. Planning no longer felt like surrender. Felt like strategy. I met with my attorney again. This time not to defend what was mine but to define what would happen to it. I updated my will. The house would go to Marissa, yes, but with a clause that it could never be transferred out of her sole name. A quiet inheritance of autonomy. I also created a fund, modest but meaningful, to support women in our county transitioning out of long-term care facilities when they didn't medically require them. The lawyer raised her eyebrows slightly. "That's specific." "It is," I said. "Because somewhere right now there is a woman sitting in a pastel hallway watching television mounted too high on the wall, wondering how she got there. And maybe she doesn't belong there." On my 54th birthday, the support group surprised me with a small brass plaque. They'd had it engraved. It read, "A woman should always have something that's hers." I laughed when I saw it. Then I cried. Not out of sadness but recognition. We mounted it near the front door. Every time I pass it, I touch the cool metal with my fingertips, steadying myself before stepping into whatever the day asks of me. MS still lives in my body. It wakes me some nights with nerve pain that feels like static under my skin. It slows my speech occasionally. It reminds me daily that strength is not measured in stairs climbed or jars opened. But I am not warehoused. I am not confused. I am not managed. I am home. And if there is one thing illness and betrayal taught me, it is this. Losing a husband is survivable. Losing your voice is not. I almost let mine disappear in the name of comfort. I won't make that mistake again. The next spring, I planted tulips along the front walkway, bright pink and yellow against the lingering brown of early March. Marissa helped, kneeling in the soil beside me, her hands smearing dirt onto the cuffs of her sweater. We laughed when a bulb slipped from her fingers and bounced into the grass, rolling like it was escaping. For the first time in years, the garden felt like my domain again. Not just the house, not just the walls and rooms, but the space around it. The porch, the yard, the scent of earth and new growth. It was tangible proof that I had survived, that I had returned, that I had been wronged and yet remained standing. Neighbors began dropping by more often, small gestures at first. Mrs. Alvarez brought rhubarb for pie. The Petersons left fresh eggs in a basket on the porch. They didn't ask about David. They didn't ask about the nursing home. They only acknowledged that I was here, that I had returned, that I belonged. I started to host small dinners again, ones that I could manage in my new rhythm. Marissa helped with lifting heavier pans, and sometimes we ordered takeout so I didn't have to overexert myself. But the evenings were ours. Laughter filled the rooms. Stories of my grandmother's stubborn ways slipped into conversation with Marissa and the friends who joined us. The house smelled of spices, butter, and hope. One evening, long after everyone had left, I sank into the couch, a cup of chamomile in my hands. I watched the shadows stretch across the hardwood floor, the way the sunlight had cut golden lines on that very floor the day David told me about comfort. I remembered the fear, the betrayal, the trembling hands, the silent cries at night. And then I remembered the clarity, the steadiness, the law that had reminded me of ownership, not just of the house but of myself. I realized that my story, the one I had lived and endured, wasn't just about betrayal or illness. It was about returning to a home that was mine, to dignity, to autonomy, to a life that I shaped rather than had imposed upon me. Sometimes when I sit on the porch with Marissa, listening to the wind in the maple tree and the faint hum of distant traffic, I hear a faint echo of my grandmother's voice. A woman should always have something that's hers. And now I do. Not because of the papers or the legal battles or even the divorce, but because I reclaimed myself. Every tremor, every ache, every small victory, they belong to me. The house belongs to me. My voice belongs to me. And for the first time in decades, I am home in every sense that matters. I don't need anyone else to decide what my comfort is anymore. I do. And that, more than any court ruling or letter or legal deed, is the inheritance my grandmother left me. It's the one she trusted me to keep. And I have. That summer I started receiving letters in the mail. Not bills. Not flyers. But letters from women I had met through the support group. Some I had only spoken to once online in the safety of anonymity. One woman wrote about her mother-in-law, a woman who had made her feel invisible for years. Another wrote about losing her husband to illness, and the quiet betrayal of friends who turned away. A few simply wrote to thank me for sharing my story in the group, for speaking truth, for surviving. I read every single one, sitting on my porch with Marissa beside me. The wind rustled through the maple leaves, and the sunlight caught the edges of the letters like little golden markers. I thought about the fear I had felt in the nursing home, the hollow quiet, the creeping sense of being unseen. And now here I was surrounded by words of acknowledgement, of empathy, of human connection. My voice mattered. Even through the tremors in my hands, the fog in my memory on bad days, I was heard. Autumn rolled around again. This time I was ready. The leaves fell in orange and red blankets across the yard. I rolled through them with my cane, laughing as Marissa snapped photos. It felt ridiculous and perfect. Life in these small, imperfect moments felt like reclamation. One afternoon, while tending the tulips with Marissa, a woman I had never met knocked at the door. She was young, maybe early 20s, with a nervous smile and a clutch of papers in her hand. I heard about your story online, she stammered. I read the support group posts. I just wanted to say thank you. I invited her in. She sat on the couch, fidgeting, and began to explain that she had been in a similar situation. Abandoned by a partner, pushed into a care facility, made to feel powerless. Her words tumbled out, breathless and raw. I didn't know where to start, she said. And then I found your posts. They made me feel like I could fight back. That I wasn't crazy or weak. I reached out and held her hands. They were small and shaking, and for a moment I saw myself at 52 in the nursing home, unsure if anyone would believe me. You're not weak, I said softly. You're still here. That's what matters. Her tears fell, unashamed, and I realized something. Surviving wasn't enough anymore. Witnessing, teaching, guiding, that was part of it. That was the next step. Over the next months, I began a small routine of outreach. Not formal, not professional, just human connection. Sometimes it was women like the young woman who knocked that day. Sometimes it was older women, alone, struggling with illness or betrayal or loneliness. We spoke on the phone, met in my living room, or sometimes walked together slowly in the garden. Each encounter reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. The power of presence, of showing up, even when the body trembles, even when the heart remembers betrayal, of saying you are seen, you are not invisible. Winter arrived with snow that year. The first storm blanketed the neighborhood in silence, and I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching flakes drift lazily downward. Marissa had gone to a friend's house, and I was alone. I thought about David, about the life we had shared, about the betrayals and the quiet kindnesses that had been swallowed up in his fear and ambition. And I realized I felt nothing close to anger. No bitterness, No desire for revenge. Just clarity. I was free. Free to move slowly. Free to laugh loudly. Free to cry when it suited me. Free to build this life exactly as I needed it to be. The house had witnessed years of joy and heartbreak. It had sheltered a family, then a woman alone, then a woman returning to herself. And now it held a kind of serenity that I had never felt before. That night, I wrote in my journal. A habit I had restarted after years of letting life happen to me without recording it. My pen shook slightly, but my words flowed clearly. I am home. I am safe. I am myself. I have learned that comfort does not come from someone deciding for me. It comes from holding on to what is yours. Your body, your mind, your home, your dignity. Illness tried to define me. Betrayal tried to erase me. But I am still here, and I am still whole in the ways that matter. The months rolled into another spring. Marissa planted her own little garden next to mine. We laughed as the tulips and daisies collided in a riot of color. I moved slowly, yes, but deliberately. Every step, every decision, every moment in that house felt intentional. I sometimes look out the window at the street, at neighbors walking dogs or children riding bikes. I remember the day I was sent away. I remember the hollow halls, the pastel walls, the silence. And I smile quietly to myself, because I came back. I came back to my home. I came back to my body. I came back to my voice. And no one can take that away. The next spring, the maple outside my porch had grown thick with new leaves. Sunlight filtered through the branches in green-gold patterns across the hardwood floors, spilling over the walls where photos of my grandmother and Marissa smiled back at me. I could hear the faint hum of the street, the distant lawnmowers, kids squealing, dogs barking. But inside the house there was stillness. It wasn't lonely. It was intentional. I had spent months reclaiming my routines. Morning stretches in the kitchen, slow walks down the driveway, tending the tulips Marissa and I had planted, baking bread that smelled like summer, like resilience. Each day I reminded myself, this house, this life belongs to me, not out of spite, not as revenge, but as truth. Then came the knock on the door. It was David. I froze at first. His hair was grayer now, his shoulders narrower, his presence smaller. I had no intention of opening the door, yet somehow I did. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure. Claire, he said, his voice low, almost fragile. David, I replied evenly, letting the weight of our shared history hang between us. He hesitated. I wanted to apologize. I let him speak. He told me about Elise leaving him, about realizing the choices he had made, about seeing me at the nursing home that first time and knowing he had underestimated me. His words stumbled out, tangled in shame and regret. I listened quietly, not for forgiveness but for understanding. I thought I was protecting you, he said finally. You weren't protecting me, I said gently. You were protecting yourself from discomfort. That's different. He looked down at his hands, as if for the first time noticing how small they had become in the absence of power over my life. I don't expect anything from you, he added. I just wanted you to know that I see now. And in that moment I did. I saw him finally. Not as a husband who betrayed me, but as a man who had been afraid of facing reality. I nodded once softly. That was enough. After he left, I sat on the porch as the sun began to dip behind the trees. Marissa was inside baking bread, humming a tune I hadn't heard in years. The smell of warm dough filled the house, and I realized I had never felt more rooted in my own life. Every step I had taken, every tear I had shed, every moment of fear had led to this. A house that was mine, a body that was mine, a life that was mine. Winter returned later that year, harsher than I expected. My legs were weaker, my hands trembled more often, and there were mornings when rolling out of bed felt like wading through fog. Yet, I refused to let these limitations define me. I adapted. Ramps, handrails, slow careful movements, and the support of Marissa and friends from the support group. The true climax didn't happen with shouting, confrontation, or dramatic courtroom victories. It happened quietly. One afternoon, while I wheeled myself into the garden to check on the tulips, I noticed a young woman from the neighborhood standing at the gate. Her name was Emily. She had heard about my story and wanted advice. She was navigating the first days of MS and didn't know where to turn. We sat together in the shade of the maple tree. I showed her the house, the garden, the pathways I had carefully cleared for my wheelchair. She listened as I spoke about fear, betrayal, and reclaiming life. For the first time in months, I realized that my survival had transformed into something else. Guidance. Witnessing. Teaching. You can fight this, I told her. Even when it feels like the world is pushing you away, even when people you trust fail you, even when your own body betrays you, you can still claim your life. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. And in that reflection I saw a younger version of myself. Timid, trembling, afraid, ready to surrender. But here in the shade of the maple tree, I felt a fierce, steady resolve. I would not disappear. That spring I celebrated my 55th birthday quietly. With Marissa and a few friends from the support group. We baked cake together, lopsided, sugary, full of laughter and mishaps. We raised glasses of sparkling cider. We told stories, each of us sharing the moments when life tried to define us, and how we had carved our own definitions. I didn't need grand gestures or dramatic revenge. My victory was measured in small, intimate truths. I was home. I had my voice. I had my autonomy. I had dignity. And finally I had peace. That night, after everyone left, I sat in the living room with the last light of sunset spilling across the floor. I touched the brass plaque on the wall my support group had given me. A woman should always have something that's hers. I whispered it softly to myself, as if saying it aloud would anchor it deeper in my bones. MS would continue. Life would continue. Challenges would continue. But for the first time in decades I knew the truth. Nothing and no one could take this from me. Not betrayal. Not illness. Not fear. I leaned back in my chair, letting the shadows stretch across the floor. I closed my eyes and breathed, and for the first time in years, I felt the fullness of being completely, unequivocally, and unshakably home.